our sovereignty, our solvency, our national security are all on the line.
Just what are the underlying causes of the mounting crisis at the U.S. border?
I'm all for immigration. However, I believe in law and order.
What are some of the unfortunate consequences of the current U.S. border policy?
The criminality, terrorism, human trafficking, drugs, crime, the draining of our public coffers for education and health care.
In this episode, we sit down with Texas Congressman Brian Babin, co-chairman of the Congressional Border Security Caucus.
And if we're such an evil country as some of the left-wing Marxists are telling folks, why are millions of people clamoring to get into the United States?
This is American Thought Leaders, and I'm Jan Jekielek. Congressman Brian Babin, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Great to be with you, Jan.
Well, so we're going to talk about the border today. And for you, this is not just a theoretical thing. Your district is very close to the border. So tell me, what are you seeing there?
Well, not anything good, I can tell you that. Although my district is not right on the Texas border, in fact, several hundred miles from it, we are definitely impacted by border issues. Undocumented folks who are passing through. We have a major trade in human trafficking. Houston is a big focus. I represent part of Houston. My district is 9 counties. If you looked at a map, it's southeastern Harris County, which is Houston, all the way over to Louisiana, and from the coast up about 110, 20 miles. And so we do have a major influx of some of these individuals. And it's a huge impact on the local taxpayers, on the state of Texas, on our resources for education, for public health, and also criminality. We've had a number of incidents down there, murders, disappearances, things like this. So it's definitely impacting even up in southeast Texas where I live.
Well, yeah, and actually just tell me your general kind of philosophy on immigration. I think that's something that people would be interested in.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a descendant of immigrants. My family actually I'm kind of a mixture, but probably more French than anything else. The Cajuns who came down, the British actually exiled them from your native Canada, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. Our ancestors came out of there about 1755 to 1759, and nobody wanted the Acadians. We call them Cajuns. So they kind of went where folks where they could find wide open spaces and not many others living there, and many of them settled in southwest Louisiana, and that's where my family came to on my father's side. My mother was her French ancestors were Huguenots, and so they actually were exiled during Louis XIV's time, and so that's not all of my family. I've got several other pedigrees, I guess you'd say, but I'm all for immigration. I think immigration has enriched our nation, our great nation, so much. And each new wave of immigrants coming in brings something new to the diversity and the greatness of our country. However, I believe in law and order. We are a country of a constitution, as envisioned by our founding fathers, based on Judeo-Christianity. And that Constitution, I think, has withstood the test of time for 240 some odd years. And we have to have an immigration policy that is lawful and orderly, and it's anything but right now. And we are seeing hordes of immigrants that have been encouraged by the rhetoric of President Biden, even when he was a candidate Biden, and all of his competitors, his opponents in the Democratic primary, mouthed rhetoric and promises that basically said, immigrants, come on up here, step 1 foot in, and you will be admitted and eventually you will be on a path to citizenship. You will receive an education. You'll get free health care. You'll get even stimulus checks. And we've seen over and over again that these people listen. And in the various countries around the world, and hundreds of countries, it's not just Mexico, it's not just the Northern Triangle nations, hundreds of countries are sending people over to the United States because of these promises. And the humanitarian aspects of this, not only for the American people, but for these poor migrants that come on a 1,000-mile trek, sometimes a 10,000-mile trek, to get into this country with these promises, and being abused by cartels and who knows who on the road up here. And then enabling what President Biden has done with this policy is enabled and empowered the Mexican drug cartels who are getting filthy rich. I've seen things called rape trees, where some unspeakable crimes and atrocities have taken place with young females who have made this trek up here. It is, I think it's justifiable to say that up to 1/3 of children and female migrants are abused, sexually abused. And then on top of that, the human trafficking and then the drug trafficking. We have a fentanyl problem. We have all kinds of drugs, methamphetamine. We've got, the least is the marijuana, and many of fentanyl and heroin. Some of these others are killing up to 65,000, 70,000 Americans per year. This is an enormous problem that kills a lot of people in this country. And so I really can't see how you can, the Democrats love to say, we just don't have the compassion. But the things that are happening on that border right now, as we speak, the COVID, one of the highest death rates and the highest infection rates of COVID is in Mexico right now. And we know that the DHS, under Secretary Mayorkas, President Biden's DHS secretary, they are not COVID testing everybody. But the ones they have, we know that up to 25% are testing positive and being released into the state of Texas. And they've been, some of these releasees, these immigrants have been asked, what are your plans? Well, I'm getting on a bus and I'm going to see my relatives in Houston, or I'm going to North Carolina, or I'm going to Missouri. And they're COVID positive. And it's amazing that the Biden administration would lock down this country the way they have, and be so absolutely fanatical about wearing masks and social distancing and what have you, and the dangers of COVID, and yet American citizens are expected to comply, but obviously illegal immigrants are not complying. And it's not their fault. This is the fault of the Biden administration. And so to say that we're inhumane, one of the most cynical of things that I can remember is all during Trump's 4 years, he inherited a mess down there on the border, a terrible mess from President Obama's administration. And through 4 years of negotiating with Mexico and Northern Triangle countries, he established some really good features. The Title 42 public health restrictions, where during a pandemic, if somebody comes in, they can immediately turn them back across the border because of the pandemic. The migrant protection protocols, to when people would come in across the border seeking asylum, they can turn them right back, say you need to wait in a safe third country or in Mexico. That's been abolished by the Biden administration. The National Declaration of Emergency, that's one thing that Biden has thrown out. Interior enforcement. We have well over 1 million illegals who have already had their day in immigration court and been given orders for removal. President Biden, in his first day, executive order that we will no longer deport. They hate President Trump so much in the Democratic Party that I believe that the good things that he did on the border have simply been ignored. And it kind of reminds me of Vice President Kamala Harris, who denigrated, demonized our vaccine. She said, I'm not going to take that. That's something that President Trump came up with. And as soon as it came out on the market and she was elected, she went down and had her vaccination. So cynicism is there, and calling President Trump inhumane and cruel for housing UACs, unaccompanied children, in what they call cages, and which forced the cessation or the termination of President Trump's policies of unaccompanied children and families, and now to see the Biden administration scrambling, asking for volunteers, calling out FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and saying this isn't a crisis, but doing all of these things, opening up new facilities. They don't call them, some of them are the exact same facilities they call cages, and now they're immigrant care influx facilities and family facilities, etc. The same facilities, but calling by a different name. Just as cynical as he can be.
Just want to push back on one thing. You mentioned that President Biden had locked down the country. What are you saying there exactly?
Well, I can't, because President Biden didn't take office until January the 20th. So I can't say that he locked us down last year. That's a fact. But I will say that during the lockdowns of many of the 50 states in this country, some of the more severe lockdowns were done by Democrat governors and their administrations, by mayors of various Democratic cities throughout the country. And I'm not going to excuse the Republicans, because some of them had us locked down as well. However, I'm a healthcare practitioner. I practice dentistry for 37 years. I happen to know a little bit about medicine. Of course, nobody knew anything about COVID-19. We know a lot more about it today than we did, at the beginning of February of last year. I couldn't help but be struck by President Biden's speech the other night when he said that in July we might be able to have a hot dog with a couple of our friends, wear masks, and socially distance. When we've got, in the state of Texas, almost 7 million people have been vaccinated. And, it's time that we open this thing back up. We can talk about, stimulus packages and so on and so forth, $2 trillion stimulus packages, which we have seen rammed through without any Republican input, no committee work here in the House of Representatives. But the truth of the matter is that, out of this stimulus package, less than 10% of that went to COVID. But the best stimulus package that we can offer this country is reopening our economies, putting our children back in schools. CDC guidelines tell them the best place for kids is in a school situation, face-to-face with a teacher. You're right. I can't say that Biden had us locked down, but I can tell you that his policies and his party, and quite frankly, since he's been in office, he's advocating for a lot of those policies.
So Secretary Mayorkas was presenting in front of Congress the other day. Presumably, I think you were probably there. So I think he actually apologized for releasing some of the migrants that had tested positive for COVID, and announced the intention to not do that. He also said, I want to quote this because I took it down. He said, "We need," or I'll quote exactly, "give us the time to rebuild the system that was entirely dismantled in the prior administration." And then he says, "and we have in fact begun to rebuild that system." So you're kind of saying a bit of the opposite. You're saying there was a good system and now that's been gutted. He's saying the system was gutted and we need time to rebuild it. What do you think of this?
I think he's being very, very cynical. I think he's being dissembling. Because when President Trump took office back in January 2017, the border was a mess. It was a mess. And President Trump, who I worked with as the co-chairman of the House Border Security Caucus, we worked with the administration all the time. He implemented policies without any help from the U.S. House of Representatives, because these last 2 years were, where the House was in the hands of Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. So they certainly weren't. Securing this border was not priority for them. In fact, opening the border was their priority. I don't know what they dismantled, because there was really not a whole lot to dismantle, and they've implemented these policies under the Trump administration. I think I've already mentioned some of them: migrant protection protocols, or the Remain in Mexico policy, because you had thousands and thousands of people who got the word. These people know our laws better than we do. These migrants, they got the word that if they came up here with children, if they came as a family, or if they were seeking asylum for imminent danger, that they would get right in. And then naturally they did. They would come in, they would be given a date to show back up for a hearing, and sometimes those dates were 2-3 years from now. And a huge percentage of them would never show up for their day in court. This is where the catch and release came from. They would get them, they would they would document them. And of course, a lot of times you don't know how old someone is. They might be 25 years old, they may look 16 years old. You have no idea. You're taking their word for it in many cases. And so I think the Trump administration wound up with the migrant protection protocols, worked out a deal with President Lopez Obrador down in Mexico, and I really can't really say enough good about President Lopez Obrador. He has really gone the extra mile, and President Trump would tell you the same thing. They called out the National Guard to protect their own southern border. They let these asylum seekers remain in Mexico. And while their cases were being adjudicated and the determination made, they had to stay there. That kept us from releasing literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of asylees or asylum seekers into the country, never to be seen again, and made sure that we protected our border. And President Biden got rid of that the very first day in office. And then being able to deport people who have already had their day in court. I mentioned that. There's 1 million plus who have had their cases adjudicated, found to have had no credible fear for to achieve the status of being an asylee. Without that interior enforcement, without being able to deport people who have already been given orders for removal, we can't get rid of the incentivization that creates more people coming in, flooding in, and bankrupting our country. I mentioned my own district. In one of my school districts, fastest growing school district in the state of Texas, and a huge burden on the local taxpayers and the state taxpayer. And so these are the kind of things that I believe that they need to be rectified. And if President Biden and Mayorkas, Secretary Mayorkas, maintain that this is not a crisis, what is? What is a crisis? It is an unbelievable situation that we have in this country today. And I love America. And I try to be a practicing Christian. Certainly not perfect, but I have compassion on these people that want to come up here and better themselves. But they have to do it in a manner that is lawful, that is achieving the national security and the safety of our own citizens. And I have met with many, many angel families who have lost loved ones to drunk drivers who are illegals, to murderers, to rapists. And I can tell you it's not a pleasant thing to sit down and listen to these people pour out their heart. And many of them are immigrants themselves. This is what's happening.
Let's talk about the role of cartels a little bit. I just had Jason Jones on the show a few days ago. Actually, he's one of the experts on this issue. But I just wanted to find out a little bit more from you, since clearly this is an important issue to you. What is the kind of connection in your mind from what you've learned between the cartels and the migration, basically, the surge in migration?
100% connection.
Okay.
You don't migrate into the United States without going through a cartel. You're either paying the cartels or you're working for the cartels. That's the way this operates. In fact, I've talked to people from the Trump administration. If you don't pay the cartels, or if you try to come in without paying the cartels, your life's in danger. And when they come in, some of them still owe money, and they know where they're going, and they will pay even after they get in. These cartels are no one to fool with, and they have been definitely empowered by the open borders crowd in the Democratic Party, and especially by President Biden's rhetoric. And they know our law better than we do. They send people across in diversion tactics. They have watchers, scouts. I've seen them. Some of my staff's been with me. We'll have a Border Patrol agent and say, there's a scout up there on top of that hill, and he's watching us. They know where these people are. They know where the openings are. They know when they shift Border Patrol from one sector to another one to help plug the gap, so to speak, or take people off their jobs to go take care of hundreds and hundreds of children and play nursemaid. They know that leaves a gap there, and so the cartels will start coming right through. That's the way the cartels operate. They make money hand and fist. Conservatively, they probably make about $500 billion a year off of their drug trade and their human trafficking.
That's incredible numbers when you think about it. And this, of course, the drug trade is a kind of a central part of this as
Absolutely.
well.
And there was a big bust the other day. Of course, a lot of this fentanyl comes from China, but it comes up through Mexico. And as a doctor, I can tell you that fentanyl is probably one of the most terrible substances. Great to use in an operating room or in a hospital setting, but when you get to fooling around with fentanyl that you have no idea of its purity or what's in it, a very small, minute amount of this can kill you. And it happens routinely, and we've lost, as I said a while ago, 65,000, 70,000 Americans per year due to drug overdoses.
Yeah, we've talked on this show a lot about how this is an element of what's called China's drug warfare, the Chinese Communist Party's drug warfare against this country.
That's right.
I want to go back to Secretary Mayorkas for a moment.
Sure.
And you were talking about there being a crisis, certainly among the unaccompanied minors, the unaccompanied children, there is a crisis. He said that, HHS doesn't have the capacity right now even to deal with this. What's the next step here in your mind?
Well, it's kind of funny because they said the same thing about President Trump. President Trump experienced this huge surge in unaccompanied children and families, and without the housing there, it makes it a very tough situation. And that's when they started putting children into these facilities. And of course, the pictures were taken, and they accused Trump of housing children in cages, quote unquote. We find out later that these so-called cages were made during the Obama administration, and now under the Biden administration and Secretary Mayorkas, they're using some of these same facilities. In fact, they're scrambling to open up facilities wherever they possibly can. I mentioned one a while ago, Midland, Texas. They opened one up with hardly any. In fact, there was no warning to the local people whatsoever. Dallas, Texas. They're opening up a big one up there, 1,000, I think 3,000 they're going to house. I'm also I was getting ready to bring up about the Fort Lee, Virginia. They're going to open up a facility there, and then also right outside of Ames Research Center, a NASA facility up in Northern California. And I am the Space Force Caucus co-chairman of that as well, and I can tell you that we really don't have any business sending people like this to NASA facilities. That's absolutely not what the mandate and responsibility of NASA is. So to go back to your question, it's kind of cynical for them to criticize and condemn President Trump, and then they're doing the exact same thing. And it would not have happened had they continued the policies that hard-earned and tough experience, the hard knocks way to learn things, is exactly what President Trump's people did, and that's how they came up with these various policies. And President Biden should have waited. He should have, before he made these executive orders on the first day and subsequent days, they should have seen how things were going to happen and why everyone knew that if Biden had won the presidency, we knew that there were going to be open borders. They said it over and over and over again. Every one of the Democrat candidates for president, including Vice President Harris, they want open borders.
Would they want open borders?
They want open borders. That's the only way I can figure it, Jan. Okay, and I know you're thinking, well, how do you know what they want?
Well, no, just there's a long distance between a closed border and an open border. Open border means there's no border, right?
We essentially have no border now, Jan. Okay, we essentially have no border. These people are coming in at will. They just walk in and give up. They know that if they get a foot in, that they've been promised that they're going to be able to stay. I call that an open border. I don't think there's I don't see any controls there whatsoever. We had 100,000, I think we had 77,000 illegals come across in January. We had 100,400 and something that came across in February. And we're on track this month to be well over that. And then they think by May we could have a couple 100,000 a month coming across. If that's not a crisis, in fact, I'd say it's not a crisis, it's a catastrophe. It is a catastrophe for this country and for our taxpayers on every level on terrorism. They caught 4 coming across recently that were on the terrorist watch list. There was a Serb and 3 Yemenis that came across. They were on the terrorist watch list. So we've got terrorism potential. We've got criminality, lots of gangs. The criminality, terrorism, human trafficking, drugs, crime, the draining of our public coffers for education and health care. It's just, there's really no handle on this unless they start instituting some policies to keep people from coming in until we can get it in an orderly fashion. We're going to get people killed, and we are getting people killed.
How?
How? Mm-hmm. By encouraging the people to come up here, to make that. Migrants are dying. I can show you some horrible looking pictures of drownings floating in the Rio Grande. A man and his 3-year-old daughter, both of them, face down in the water. I've seen the rape trees. We know what's happening in sanctuary cities. We know what's happening when they don't cooperate. The local authorities do not cooperate with immigration authorities. We know that there are people that are loose in this country who are criminals.
You're in the minority in Congress right now. Obviously, you're not the fan of the administration's policies. What can be done in your mind to fix this at this point? What are you doing to fix it?
Exactly what I'm doing right now, Jan. The mainstream media doesn't get this information out there. They don't want people to know of the crime, the deaths, the overdoses, the terrorism. They don't want to see the things that are happening down on the border. They don't want people to know. In fact, I'll tell you how I know that. Because we have a recent gag order, unofficial gag order coming down from the Biden administration when the Border Patrols and sector chiefs on the border are not allowed to give out statistics, to show photographs or videos, or even to speak with the media. And one of my colleagues went to a facility in Midland, Texas, to see a brand spanking new, recently opened juvenile detention center. And they would not let him in, and he's a member of Congress. They finally let him in after some pressure, I think, was brought to bear. This is the one I was telling you about a while ago. There was little to no advance warning to the local authorities that this facility was going to be opened up. And so they're trying to hide this. The Democrat Party, the mainstream media, they don't want the average American to know of the disaster that is going on our borders. And I know that it sounds incredible when I talk about what's happening down there, but I've seen a lot of it with my own eyes. And I know people that are down there. I know people that work for the Border Patrol. I have a long relationship of 4 years with numbers of the Trump administration who worked in Border Patrol and ICE, who were even close to the president as advisors. I worked with them a lot and made suggestions. I still have conversations with them. And they are very, very upset that they finally had gotten a handle on the border situation at the end, towards the last year or so of the Trump administration, only to see it thrown out of the window by foolish, foolish decisions on the part of President Biden and his administration.
Well, one of the decisions was also to stop the border wall construction, right? I need to get you to tell me about what you think about that, although I think I know.
Well, I can tell you that barriers do work. And when I hear Speaker Pelosi say their walls are immoral, and I've heard a number of other Democrat elected officials say that, and I think I look and their own private homes are behind walls. And they stopped building the wall down on the southern border. We know that borders work. I mean that walls work. I have been to San Diego, California. I have been to El Paso, Texas. Before those walls were built, they had illegal immigrants pouring across there. And they think that those walls reduced immigration by 95%. And so when we see President Biden halting all wall construction on day one of his administration, and I have seen videos of people. You may have a wall with a 3 or 4 mile junction in the middle that's missing. Wall here, no wall here, wall there. This is where they come. I've seen with my own eyes where a wall stopped. Sassabee, Arizona. Nice big 20-foot wall, steel bollards. You get to the end of it, there's a 5-strand barbed wire fence. It's a gate tied with a linen cord. And you look around the wall and you see a well-worn path going down the valley and up over the hill. The migrants just come around the wall. The coyotes are the ones that work for the cartels, and they bring these people to these areas that are where it's not complete. But walls work. And you can go right out here and see that Mrs. Pelosi, although she claims they're immoral, there's a 7-foot steel fence miles around Capitol Hill here, the nation's capital, the beacon of freedom in the world. 7-foot steel wall, coils of razor wire, and thousands of U.S. Army National Guard troops. If walls don't work, then Ms. Pelosi, why are they here? Why would you want to, you say to protect our capital, and we find out from the FBI there's no credible threat here. They have not been able to tell us that there is a credible threat. We've got a wall here, but down on the southern border where there is a crisis and a catastrophe occurring right now, they're not completing the wall. It just doesn't make any sense. It is so much hatred of Donald J. Trump that they will not take the good things that this man has done and his administration has done to secure this border and maintain them so they can get a handle and protect Americans, protect the migrants themselves. And let me tell you, our sovereignty, our solvency, our national security are all on the line because of what's going on and created down there on that southern border.
So, in the end, what is the House Border Security Caucus working on as we speak?
We are trying to communicate to right now, we don't have there's not a whole lot of rapport with this Biden administration. We're reaching out to them. I've written a number of letters, me and many of my colleagues, asking questions about why they're abolishing some of these very efficient and good policies that worked under the Trump administration. We're asking about COVID and why they're releasing COVID positive patients, immigrants loose into the Texas and across the border and to fan out into the rest of the country. And so the communications is what's really the important aspect of what we're doing now, to inform the American people, to try to see if we can elicit some answers out of the Biden administration, and to get our own membership versed up in just how serious this situation is down on the border.
Well, so before we finish up, I actually want to touch on this other area of interest. You know, I see you have the NASA pin on
Yes.
your lapel there. So you're the ranking member of the Space and Aeronautics Subcommittee.
That's right.
And also the Space Force Caucus, right? You know, this is a big topic, a big issue for you. And you mentioned, of course, the NASA facility earlier.
Right.
So we haven't heard very much about what's happening with the Space Force. So we haven't heard very much about what's happening with the sort of the U.S. approach to space at the moment, aside, of course, from a lot of the information we're hearing from the private sector. So what's going on?
Well, it's funny that you say that, because when asked, the press secretary of President Biden made a comment the other day, several weeks ago, when asked about the Space Force. She made a very snide comment, like, "Oh, that," or something of that nature. But the Space Force is an extremely important part of our U.S. military today. It is something that we've been talking about for years, and under President Trump, it's become a reality. Our adversaries, the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and others, have pushed the war-fighting domain from Earth and in the atmosphere to up in space. And it was time that we made moves to have a special branch of the service that would be concentrated on nothing but space and defend our great country from adversaries who would attack us and do harm to us from space. And so I was very, very glad to be a part of that. I was, as the ranking member and former chairman of the House Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, we actually were the authorizing body that committee over NASA, our civil space administration, and we also everything. You know, some people say, well, there's no military aspects to NASA. There aren't. But what is developed by NASA can certainly be utilized by our military. In other words, it does expand and increase our warfighters' capabilities. And so you can look at some of our adversaries like China. China's space program, it's military. Russia's military. Well, ours is civil. But if we develop things on our civil side, I promise you, on the military side, they will gain benefit from that. So anyway, just being it's been a great honor for me to be the co-chairman of that caucus for the Space Force, and I certainly hope that the Biden administration takes that very, very seriously, at least on the order that President Trump did. And we've got some great things happening on our civil space side too, in NASA. We've seen more commercial operations. We just saw, for years, I think the last 9 or 10 years, we hadn't been able to put American astronauts even up on the International Space Station on American rockets, because we didn't have that capability anymore. So we've been buying tickets, if you will, between 70 and 80, $90 million a ride to the Russians to put our own astronauts up there. Well, a commercial rocket from SpaceX launched this past year, 2 American astronauts to the International Space Station. So that is something I'm very proud to see, that America will not be dependent upon foreign powers, especially one that may not be quite so friendly with us, and that's Russia. But we can do it ourselves. American astronauts on American rockets from American soil. We can do that now.
So what can we expect with the Space Force, I guess? That's the big question on, I think, a number of people's minds.
Well, it's in the making. The last time we had, we just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the Space Force in recent months. And General Raymond, who is the commander, he's had an opportunity to create a brand new branch of the U.S. military that we haven't seen since, I think, 1947, when the U.S. Air Force was split off from the U.S. Army. There was the U.S. Army Air Corps, and they created the Air Force. I'm a former Air Force officer myself. And so I think General Raymond has done a really, really great job in putting this thing together. It's a very agile force. It's a small force. And quite frankly, I hope they stay agile so that we can save taxpayers' money and acquisitions, and also be as efficient as possible. Because we've seen a lot of our branches of our military not quite so agile anymore. But we nevertheless have to defend this great country. And without a military in today's world that is tops, we're in bad shape. So hopefully the Space Force will continue to do what they're designed to do, and join forces and ranks with the Navy and the Army, the Air Force, and the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard, and protect us. And so as a former military officer myself, it makes me proud to see that. I just hope that the Biden administration will take it very, very seriously, because I can tell you that the Chinese and Russians are taking it very seriously.
So any final thoughts before we finish up?
I'm very interested in space, not only because of my committees, but also because I represent Johnson Space Center, the largest NASA facility in the country. They're in Houston, Mission Control, International Space Station, and it's a great privilege to be able to represent Johnson. But we have a great country. This country was an experiment in freedom 43 years ago, and the world will not be as good of a place without having a free America. And if we're such an evil country as some of the left-wing Marxists are telling folks, why are millions of people clamoring to get into the United States? Why? Because we are a great country, free. You have an opportunity to do wonderful things here. But you have to love this country. And many of our folks don't. It's really sad to see folks who are convinced that America's a bad country. And that pains me. I have 17 grandchildren, and I want them to appreciate what America is, because I can tell you this world would be a dark, dark place without having an America. So that we could see the beacon of freedom, the shining city on the hill that President Reagan mentioned. If that wasn't there, I think it would not be as pleasant to live on this planet. And so I really believe that we've got to maintain our freedoms and our liberties against seemingly great odds that want to destroy our Constitution and set up a socialist economic system rather than economic freedom and repress our freedom of speech. Thank you for your entity that wants to get real news out there and find out what's going on. And number two, is protect our gun rights. The First and Second Amendment, I think, they could hardly be any more important. And I know it's socialism. You can read history books, so many of them. Socialist countries start out by repressing your freedom of speech, then they take away your right to protect yourself, and then you have a socialist dictatorship. I want America to be free.
Well, Congressman Babin, such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, Jan.